Okay, welcome. Thank you. Please take your seats if you're in the room. Thank you for joining us if you are online. Welcome to the final session of the SIWI Seminar, Informing the Political Agenda Through Science. WaterAid and UNESCO Intergovernmental Hydrological Program are proud to co-convene this seminar series, and we've had an amazing set of speakers throughout our sessions. My name is Catherine Farr, and I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for International Climate Action at WaterAid. We also have with us Dr. Alice Orelli, who is the Chief Section Advisor on the Groundwater Stability and Program Cooperation at IHP UNESCO. The focus of our sessions that began on the 27th of August has been to inform the 2023 policy discussions on water and sanitation with the latest science and evidence from across the water sector. The goal of this seminar has been to bridge researchers and policy practitioners who generate science and evidence with policymakers and decision makers who want evidence and science to ensure that they create well-informed policies. This seminar began last Monday with a discussion around some top scientific and practitioner work advancing water policy. We heard about the value and the need of multi-sectoral engagement and of strengthening the enabling environment, about how remote sensing can reduce the risk of dry boreholes, and how data sets and risk indices can improve investments, operations, and client utility interactions. In our session last Thursday, we examined accelerating water security through three themes: water sanitation and hygiene, or WASH, water resource management and governance, and advancing services and observations. And the key takeaways from this session included a lack of progress on WASH undermines progress in many other dimensions of health, development, and climate, including infectious disease, poverty reduction, education, and gender. And that those interlinkages also mean that WASH can be a vehicle to advance progress on these elements and to break down structural inequalities. We need multi-sectoral coordination to advance water security. This integration is critical to be able to respond to the biodiversity challenges, changes in water storage, and climate change. We need science-informed policies on ecosystems and adaptation, and better governance and regional cooperation over shared resources. We need funding and financing to make this a reality for better data and capacity building. We know data, particularly open data, can create better policies, and climate change and remote sensing are changing how we understand hydrology, and these new technologies and innovations will enable us to better respond to water security. I would now like to welcome to the stage Dr. Gabrielle Eckstein from the Texas A&M University, former president of the International Water Resource Association, who's just led our session 2 discussion and will share with us some key messages.
So thank you very much. I'll be very brief. We had a really lively series of discussions, conversations about the science policy interface and taking into what we learned from the prior sessions and trying to develop and formulate ideas of what messages we want to take forward, certainly to this session here, but also into the future, clearly the UN conference coming up in March of 2023. 4 particular ideas or messages that I sort of drew out of the conversations that we engaged in. And the first one is engagement with all sectors. As we develop these scientific ideas and developments and innovations and so on, we have to include local communities, we have to include stakeholders, we have to include the youth, women, all members of civil society as we formulate the priorities and as we formulate the policy. So that's the first message that sort of jumped out at me through the program. The second is prioritization. There's so much going on. I would actually say there's maybe too much going on, and we can't do everything. And if we try to do everything, we'll do nothing. So we really do need to prioritize what it is that we want to achieve short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Third one, financing and funding these priorities. And not just the development of science, the development of innovation and so on, but also implementation of the resulting priorities. We've got to have funding mechanisms that apply at the national levels, maybe global levels, national levels, but also specifically locally. And lastly, maybe the most important, certainly to me, is communication. Uh, the policymakers have to understand the science, and to do that, the scientists have to be able to communicate their messages effectively, concisely, and in terms and language that the policymakers will understand. But at the same time, it's got to go the other way too. The policymakers have to convey what they believe, what they've learned, they've gathered as the priorities, the problems, the issues that have to be addressed. They have to go to the scientists and say, this is the information we're lacking. These are the gaps. We need your support, and so that the scientists will understand what is missing, what is necessary, and then they can go back to the policymakers and provide that translated information. So communications both ways. So those are the 4 messages. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Gabriel. I completely agree. It is absolutely a two-way street, and I think we've been hearing that again and again throughout this seminar. Next, we have the pleasure of hearing about what the opportunities are in moving from science to policy action from Csaba Karosi, who is the President-elect of the 77th session of the UN General Assembly and Director of Environmental Sustainability in the Office of the President for the Government of Hungary.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, science-based information is key to trustful partnerships for development that we need more than ever in today's crisis-stricken world. Member states need it to strengthen resilience, to analyze risk factors, to validate medium and long-term sustainable development pathways, and to prevent breakdowns. It is clear that business as usual has not prevented us from getting into a water crisis. We are in sore need of transformation. How we think and educate, as well as how we plan and manage our water resources, how we conduct climate action and manage risks. The UN Conference on Water in 2023 will be a unique opportunity to shape the global agenda on water. I hope that Stockholm Water Week participants will work together to come up with transformative solutions that will help us reaching SDG 6 targets in an environmentally and climate smart way. I'm also inviting all of you to participate in the preparatory meeting for the UN 2023 Water Conference, an event that will take place on October 25th and will be preceded by a one-day consultation with stakeholders on October 24th. This day of consultations will be dedicated to transformative pathways to be proposed to the conference. My wish is to bring science, practice, and policy together. The best would be to ensure that scientific evidence and experience from the field inform policymakers. We must support decision makers by providing opportunities to hear from the science and practice communities about what works and what does not, and to ensure that science and evidence inspire sound policies. The last time the UN has discussed water at such a high-level global conference was in 1977. Many good ideas were formulated then, but the follow-up process was not strong enough to make sufficient change on the ground. We must learn from this past experience and do better. I look forward to receiving your transformative ideas that are supported by member states, private sector entities, and civil society actors. I hope they will all come together with clear implementation proposals.
I think we're all really looking forward to those preparation meetings in October. Next, I'd like to welcome Tanya Miskova, Ambassador in charge of water diplomacy and the circular economy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Slovenia, who will share some thoughts about setting priorities when moving from science to policy action. Tanya.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and to address you. Science, data, and technology form the foundations of well-informed, evidence-based policymaking, including my field, water diplomacy. I'm sure by now you know this badge, this pin, which represents women in Water Diplomacy Global Network. The importance of effective communication of science and data-driven insights to policymakers cannot be overestimated. Water science can be complex and difficult to understand, data either lacking or overwhelming. Good science communicators and an enabling environment are essential for an effective two-way dialogue that Gabriel mentioned between science and policy. In water diplomacy, science can provide tools for starting new political conversations or transforming entrenched narratives that hinder trust building and cooperation. Scenarios, modeling, diagnostics, focusing on shared risks and on the benefits of water action, particularly in transboundary settings, can be a catalyst for water cooperation across borders. Independent data from neutral sources can help overcome reluctance to share data and thus help create trust. Cutting-edge anticipation methodologies are useful tools for preventive and early warning action. Science and data underpin application of environmental peace-building approaches at strategic programming and project level. It is, however, extremely important that science be applied with a full understanding of the local context, be it socioeconomic, environmental, political, and of the geostrategic constellations. So contextualizing science and technology is key. Socio-hydrological interaction can be helpful in this. Thinking outside the water box, taking a multidisciplinary approach in communicating is important. Framing solutions in terms of multiple benefits for economy, for social or political benefits. For example, a certain solution which may be costly or complex to implement, if it can be presented as one reducing dependence on water resources from a neighboring country, therefore changing the geostrategic calculus, stands a much better chance of being adopted. Building a good working relationship and transparent communication between science and policy is crucial from the point of view of trust. Trust in the independence of science, trust between science and policy, science and the public having trust in their politicians that they will adopt well-informed decisions based on science. Just yesterday, I've heard about a very good practice that Finland introduced, roundtables between water scientists and high-level decision makers that helps in this process. Efficient and transparent communication is also important for governments to be able to introduce changes and reforms that can be difficult for the public to understand and accept. To give you an example, when last year my government tried to fast-track amendments to the water law without a sufficient, transparent, inclusive consultation with the science and the public, it backfired because most water experts then spoke against the amendments and they were roundly defeated by the public in a referendum. In democracies, the policies often reflect the public opinion. So to influence policy, science needs to influence the public first and not just convey the facts that many of us maybe won't understand, but also appeal to emotions. Water is often an emotional issue. One of the best ways, I think, to do that is through visualization, maybe with the help of artists, and storytelling. This can be quite effective. I know most scientists don't tweet, so maybe use opinion makers. And I strongly believe that all water scientists should have, in the future, in their curriculum, a course on communicating science and a course on contextualizing science, anthropology perhaps. Engaging and educating the media is a difficult task, but it is worth an effort. Well-informed media can put the right kind of pressure on the politicians, the right kind of questions. And I also think you need what I would call the rock stars of water science to bring attention to water and also to reverse the trend of declining interest in water studies. I think many of us are facing a lack of water professionals. And I would like to conclude with what the governments would expect from science at the 2023 UN Water Conference. Something was already said about it. Of course, a clear set of recommendations on priorities. I would say emphasizing the immediate and short-term actions, because most politicians do think short-term, but they also think themselves as visionaries, so they also need to see how these proposed measures are contributing to a long-term vision of a more water-secure world. And I believe it would help to frame your recommendations and solutions within the new upcoming economic or governance paradigms. Water must be part of redefining our economies from extractive to redistributive. Scientists should work with experts that are promoting these new paradigms and are acting as government consultants. I'm thinking Mariana Mazzucato, I think she's in the building right now talking about this probably, and the recently established Global Commission on the Economics of Water she's co-chairing. While the governments are keen to hear about the most advanced high-tech solutions, many of them, particularly in developing countries, would prefer to hear about low-tech, low-cost, easy to implement, easy to scale up and sustain, and solutions that leave no one behind. On data, open access to data, open access to science. Remind governments of their commitment to open science in a resolution adopted at the last UNESCO General Conference. And I think initiatives on data standardization at a global level would also be welcome. And finally, I think we need a global water champion who would go and engage other sectors, science, other processes, team up with stakeholders and mobilize finance, including for science. Slovenia is among countries calling for a UN special envoy for water and hope that her or his appointment will be announced during the 2023 conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Having heard from the priorities from a government perspective, and exciting to hear about the energy around new paradigms, and again, that theme of communication, which I believe will continue to come up. We will now hear from an intergovernmental context, and I'll turn to Shamila Narbadul, who is the Assistant Director General for the Natural Sciences of UNESCO.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear participants, I'm very pleased to address all of you in the last session of this seminar, in particular in this year in which the UNESCO Intergovernmental Hydrological Programme, UNESCO IHP, is one of the key collaborating partners of the World Water Week. I'd like to share with you the strong commitment of UNESCO in contributing to accelerate change through strengthening partnerships in the water arena and outside the water sector as part of the future water action agenda and the water secure world. UNESCO has already prepared a tool that links science policy, that is, an international standard setting instrument on open science, in the form of the first ever UNESCO recommendation on open science, which was adopted by 193 member states during the UNESCO General Conference in November 2021. This UNESCO recommendation on open science provides an international framework for open science policy and practices that recognizes disciplinary and regional differences in open science perspectives. The recently released Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC report highlighted that increases in frequency and intensity of extremes have reduced food and water security, hindering efforts to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. This requires an acceleration in our scientific programs to address water resources challenges aggravated by climate change. But this also requires an access to scientific programs, free, open access to every person across the world. the 9th phase of the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program of UNESCO, 2022-2029, has as a theme, Science for Water Secure World in a Changing Environment. This aims to ensure that by 2029, member states have the knowledge, the strong capacities in science and research in a context of sustainable development for water secure nations. The main objective is to foster the production of sound science and build capacities to inform and influence policy making. UNESCO, being the UN system organization with the mandate in science, takes note with satisfaction the role of science and capacity development in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this has also been highlighted in the Dushanbe Declaration towards UN 2023 Water Conference. I am pleased to inform you that UNESCO, for its part, will pay its full contribution and will work with all of you towards a water secure world. UNESCO UNDESA coordinates the UN Water Capacity Development Initiative, CDI, and we will contribute to the implementation of the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework. UNESCO will also contribute to the UN 2023 Water Conference with a call for action on water and gender, and we send a strong message to policymakers for more inclusiveness. And before I finish, I want to thank SIWI once again for giving UNESCO this opportunity.
I can definitely say that WaterAid echoes the focus on inclusivity in her remarks. Thanks to all of our speakers, both keynote and statement, for setting the scene so well. And now I'd like to move to our moderated roundtable discussion. So I'd like to warmly welcome Mark Smith to join me on stage. He is the Director General of the International Water Management Institute, IMI. He will be moderating and introducing our hybrid panel that will discuss the challenges and opportunities to advance priorities. Mark. Oh, sorry.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine. If I could ask the three panelists who are in the room with us, which I believe is Carolina, Sarush, and Kelly is here. Yes, if you could please come up. What I'm slightly unsure of at the last moment is what's the plan for where they will be? They'll stand at the table? Or maybe pull up a stool to the table. Maybe that's the way to do it. Yeah. Okay, very good. And we have our three panelists who are online as well, correct? They're hearing us? All right, very good. So let's make a start. Okay, so I'm very pleased to be able to moderate this roundtable on bridging what is at times a very elusive science to policy gap in relation to water. Our aim from the perspective of policy leaders, that's our discussion today, from the perspective of policy leaders, is to shed light on how the scientific community, or perhaps we broaden that out somewhat to the community that brings scientific knowledge, data, and evidence to policy-making tables, how that community can be more effective in supporting and enabling better policy processes, decisions, and outcomes. As we've heard, this roundtable will be bringing to a close the series of 3 sessions that have made up this seminar, and it's an opportunity to draw conclusions about how science, data, and evidence can be used in the lead up to and in the UN 2023 Water Conference to help make the conference both more successful and more impactful. We had a very nice report back from Gabriel on session 2 that had just occurred in this morning, which called for prioritization, it called for working across sectors, called for working with communities in this science to policy interface, two-way communication. So we know, and I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that comes to Stockholm Water Week, we know that bridging science and policy in water is a complicated endeavor. It has its complications. So I'm very grateful, therefore, to a group of excellent panelists who are going to help us understand how we can work better with those complications. As you see, we have a hybrid roundtable. We have 6 people in our panel, 3 here with us in the room and 3 online. With us in Stockholm is first Saraj Kumar Jha, who is Global Director for the World Bank's Global Water Practice, a role he took up, I think, very recently, just in the last couple of months, after serving as the World Bank's Regional Director in the Middle East. Next is Carolina Tornesi-McKinnon, who's the President of the World Youth Parliament for Water. Carolina is a chemical engineer who in her day job with Xylem is a senior product management analyst. And Kelly Parsons is the CEO of WaterAid America, a post she has held since 2019, following executive roles with, for example, Population Services International and the Marketing Leadership Council. Online, we have in the top right, Dr. Akissa Bari, who is the former Minister of Agriculture of Tunisia. Akissa has had a notable career bridging science and policy, having worked in research institutions, including as Director for Africa in my institution, IMI, some time ago, as well as in policy-making roles. So she's the perfect person for this panel. Also, the bottom of your screen, His Excellency Jonibek Hikmat, who has had a distinguished career in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Tajikistan and is currently permanent representative of the Republic of Tajikistan to the United Nations. And finally, Elena Mana-Nkova, who is Deputy Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, where she has worked since 2006 in a series of senior leadership and executive roles. So welcome to you all. So let's get the discussion moving. And I'm going to go first to our online guest, Ambassador Hikmat. Ambassador, Tajikistan is co-chairing, as we know, the UN 2023 Water Conference. And I think it will help us a great deal in getting this discussion moving, to hear from you on what you see as the critical ambitions of the 2023 conference. What outcomes from the conference should we be aiming for, in your view, in the view of Tajikistan?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Greetings from New York. Thank you for having me. It's great to be part of this session, which focuses on the challenges and opportunities to advance the identified priorities in 2022 and 2023, and share some of the co-hosts, the Netherlands and Tajikistan, co-host of the UN 2023 Water Conference perspectives on the outcomes of this important historical event and the ways international community could contribute to make it truly actionable and result-oriented. So as a co-host of the UN Water Conference, we have high ambition as well as expectation for and from the conference, simply because our world faces cascading and interlinked global crises and conflicts, which put our aspirations set up in 2030 agenda in jeopardy. This is particularly true for SDG 6 and other water-related goals. Billions of people still lack safely managed drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene services. More than 733 million people in countries with a high and critical levels of water stress. Demand for water is rising due to the population growth, urbanization, and increasing pressure from agriculture, industry, and energy sector. It's obvious we must work up 4 times faster to get on track to meet SDG 6. Are we ambitious enough? I don't think so. We have come a long way. It took us almost 50 years, 3 water decades, several big summits, MDGs, now SDGs, to realize, among other things, the importance of treasuring this scarce resource. And we must not stop here. Let us seize the moment and fully utilize the upcoming UN 2023 Water Conference to mobilize action, cooperation, and partnership to accelerate the attainment of internationally agreed water-related goals and targets, including those in the 2030 agenda. The conference needs to also mobilize all sectors, actors, and countries and create political momentum needed to act. From our end, since the 2023 conference will result in President's summary, we have introduced a water action agenda to turn political momentum created by the UN 2023 conference into tangible and ambitious actions to get progress on track. It will be inclusive of all stakeholders, integrated across sectors, aligned with other intergovernmental processes, and bring transformative action for the water action decade in the spirit of the 2030 agenda. I will probably stop here, Mr. Moderator, and I'm happy to jump in another questions that
Great.
you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Very clear and very helpful input to get this moving. I next want to go to Carolina. The ambassador has just called for high ambition, tangible actions, but high ambition. Clearly, young people have a major stake in this conference, arguably the biggest stake. So what are the ambitions from your point of view, from the point of view of the networks of youth that you work with? And maybe to help us move on to the questions about science and data, are there areas where you see that science and data can really make a difference as we try to set that ambition, try to set up those ambitions?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here. I don't have too much time, so I'll try to be very direct. I think what young people and most everyone in this room is expecting is real actionable change that can be implemented, long-term strategies with the support from science, the support from the financial sector, the support from private sector, and to really have this as a multi-stakeholder approach, but to think very long-term. We're not going to have the conference and then the next year we've achieved SDG 6. It's not functional. And so I think really that's just what we're looking for, and to have a part in that, because we've heard, or if you haven't yet, we have to quadruple our efforts to achieve SDG 6 by the timeline. And how else are we going to do that without including more people, getting more diverse opinions? And as our honorable speaker from Hungary said, not doing business as usual. And I think that's where science can come in. If we're going to change the pace, we need to have a compass, a map. How are we going to change it? And I think that's exactly where science comes into play, to tell us where we need to go, where are we lacking. And I think you were talking about the previous session with that intercommunication, where we have to go to science and tell them what we need, and the researchers, academia have to come to us and tell them where we're lacking. So, yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, no, change the pace. I think we all agree with that. We need to accelerate and move, have a real sharp focus on actionable change. So let me move now to Elena. From the point of view of WMO, I know that WMO is mobilizing quite significantly in preparation for the 2023 conference and for that ambition of actionable change. So what are the outcomes that WMO is expecting from the conference? And where do you see data and science, a core business of WMO, where do you see data and science making the biggest difference? Elena.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you for having me here, first of all. I'm very proud to be part of this panel. Sorry for not being with you and still in two-dimensional mode. World Meteorological Organization is extremely happy to be able to grant the special support to this conference. Over the last 3 years, WMO adopted through the Congress 8 high ambitions for water and meteorological organizations and a comprehensive action plan. So for WMO, issue of water security and water uncertainty is now becoming one of the key problems and key ambitions for the conference. The main thing which I think WMO would like to support participants and governments and multi-stakeholder participants of the conference is to understand that water and climate are interlinked and related in such a way that water action alone cannot be implemented without it being integrated in climate action. You know, we are quite resourceful in supporting climate agenda. We have global climate indicators, climate assessments, IPCC, climate research. But the more we think about how this all works together, the more we understand that water security, food security, energy security, health security, all dependent on climate. So we're trying to put things together in such a way that the people would not just understand the sense of urgency, but would be more equipped with information and assessments to take proper action. I think that our ambition is just to put everything together and deal with this as one phenomena. As we speak right now, I just cannot not mention this. The Pakistan is devastated with enormous floods, more than 1,000 people killed and 30 million displaced and affected. In the same time, the Great Horn of Africa right now is experiencing strongest drought in 40 years. So I wouldn't talk about the details of this, but the things we see in the world, the way we try to save lives, to alert people of the extreme events, it should be the same as we try to alert people about water stress, water resources distribution, how they change, and what we can do about this. So I think that's a little bit of a big high-level statement, but I just wanted to start with this. Thank you very much. I will give more details in the following questions. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Elena. It's interesting. We're here in a session to talk about policy and science. And all of our speakers so far have spoken about action and the need to move to action and with urgency. So I wanted in the next round of discussions, questions, which is with Kelly, Akisa, and Saroush, to discuss actionable science. So it's quite a nice segue that our panelists have provided me with. So by actionable science, I mean, so what is it that policymakers see as water science and evidence that is actionable now? And what are, also thinking about the other side of that coin, perhaps, what are key policy areas where there's a lack of data and evidence that is holding back action, holding back moving ahead with policy change? So first to Akisa online. As I said in introducing you, you have experience on both sides of the science policy gap. So what, in your experience, are some examples of policy development where there is now clear and actionable science and evidence? And then maybe also just touch upon, if you could, your view briefly on where there's a mismatch between policymakers' needs and the science available. Akisa?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this session. And I apologize for being far away. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of scientific information that could be really helpful in solving a number of issues, but that is not being used. And a number of prospects for science-based solutions would be on advances in technology, in science for managing water, for agriculture, for environmental purposes, about climate and climate change, and we have heard just now, and on developing management, institution, and policy. One thing that I think we should move quickly and to position water among the priorities for security and peace in the world. I think water is a matter of national security, but it's also an international priority. And we have heard now just from WMO also how it is, I mean, perceived with all the problems of floods and drought that we have been experiencing, and things are being accelerating. Another point is the importance of water for man and nature. We are more aware of this importance and how various water systems, would they be terrestrial, or like river basin, lakes, reservoirs, wetlands, groundwater, or marine ecosystem, or open oceans, the role they are playing, and regarding water, food, and also climate, climate issue. The importance of water storage, physical and non-physical. And I think that you have just produced a nice report on this, and the World Bank also. And so this is contribution of different kinds of storage systems and we have to really look at them, how they can be implemented, and conjunctive use of these different water storage systems, would it be natural or human-made. I mean, on technologies that focus on overall productivity of water at basin, there are a number of, researches that have been conducted, and we know, would it be for large scale or community-based systems? We have a number of research that has been undertaken, and we have results that can be quite quickly implemented. improvement in rainwater harvesting, all the systems that are, so you see, I mean, the large and the smaller scale, how to make irrigated agriculture more efficient, a more efficient user of water with on-farm irrigation and so on, but also all the water efficiency that can be done at city level regarding water supply system or wastewater, whether it be sewage or non-sewage. So there are a number of advances that have been made. And at the same time, there are a number of problems. And I would like to stress the problem, for example, of data in the African continent. The lack of water data is really a very, very big problem. And we don't know, for example, the percentage of African population that will have access to safely managed drinking water services or safely managed sanitation by 2030. It's a big unknown. How can we, take reforms or put in place policies when we are lacking this kind of critical data and information? So we really have, a big problem. So it would be interesting to see if, there are other ways with the data revolution, if we can lead to more inclusive development that will benefit people. There are also a number of problems, the fragmented, the water, I don't like to call it a sector, but the water ecosystem is really fragmented, and we have really a problem because of this fragmentation. So from the point of view of governance and providing, we know that providing scientific advice to governments is not easy because of this problem of problems of governance gap between knowledge and governance gap between the knowledge creators and the policy makers. And so, because if we don't have research that is anticipating, the research that we are implementing today has been undertook yesterday. So this is, we have to be always, and so we have this problem of lack of linkages between policy and science. That is really, you have stressed this already. So there is a sense of urgency, and we need to improve preparedness at national and preparedness at risk for at national and community levels. We need to think differently about managing risk and to increase the water resilience portfolio. The data that we have produced, the way we were thinking about the climate, about the solution that we had are more or less, because of the rapid changing of climate, we need to adapt much more quickly and to produce another kind of knowledge. And this is something that we are being challenged as scientists and policymakers we have. So the water infrastructure has to be changed to think about the conveyance and the distribution, how we are going to operate. So there is, even though we have, a lot of knowledge, but we have to adapt differently. We have to undertake a different kinds of knowledge from the point of view of also technological innovation, all these data and research gaps. We have to identify the new research gaps that are there. So there are new models and so on. The storage I was talking about. So there are, as I said, we have a lot to say about all this, but we need much more time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Akisa. Very, very clear, very useful. So we have actionable science around science and evidence, mobilizing science and technology, agriculture and the environment, and how we better manage water. Some concerns that you identified around the lack of data and particularly around water in Africa and the uncertainties and how that's growing as we go forward. And an appeal to position water better as position water in the climate and security space as well. So let me turn now to you, Saroush. You work with the World Bank, you work very closely with the highest levels of government. So how does this question look to you? On what issues is the data and evidence clear and it helps you in working with governments, and where is it missing?
So let me come straight to the point. The focus in this session is on policy, and broadly you're talking about national, local policies, because that is what is implemented. The global discussion is to inform national policies, national action plans. My experience so far, pretty much in developing countries around the world, first of all, in these countries where we work, the countries don't invest in data collection. there isn't really a policy on data in most countries. The OECD countries may be investing a bit more, but in developing countries, you're looking at 0.01% of GDP going into the data systems. The departments of statistics or the central administration of statistics are the most underfunded, underprofiled organizations in the government. And they are the custodian of data. Now, when you have a global research, you have a global science trying to inform national action, you're missing the level of granularity. Because the global science can be helpful to give you a sense of where things are moving, what the trend is. It doesn't help you to define what needs to be done in a particular province, in a state, in a district, because you need a lot more local data. And data is one part of the science. I would broadly say countries need to invest more in research and development, which basically fuels innovation. And that is certainly not happening more broadly. It is definitely not happening in the case of water, because water is also one of the most underprofiled ministries in the countries where we work around the world. The second point I wanted to make was that, so whatever little is being invested in collecting data, the governments are hiding the data. They're not disclosing the data in the name of security, in the name of not being able to understand how the poverty is distributed in the country, which part of the country is benefiting more from the public finances than others. So in my view, before we talk about more investment, I think we should also be calling for more open data, more disclosure of data. And I'm not talking about what you call the secondary data sets. I'm talking about the primary data sets. Often some governments disclose secondary data sets which are not useful for the researchers. There are a number of colleagues I found, university students here, they are interested in primary data, which actually helps you to understand the science part of it, as to what kind of local action investments will actually make an impact in a municipality, in a city, in a village. So I think more broadly, very important that we focus on what I would call the open data. Governments need to disclose data. I would understand if there are a few things which are directly linked to defense here and there, but I think broadly, we see the level of open data initiatives in the countries is a very, very problematic thing. My last point on implementation. Often, when rubber hits the road, when all these discussions move into implementation, that is where we have a problem. The political economy of not just the data which I described, the political economy of water sector reforms, the access question, the inclusion question, targeting of people who really deserve water and sanitation first, more broadly, and how the public finances are used in this sector, the political economy is very, very challenging. And if you want to change the narrative, you need more transparency, you need more accountability. And this is where the investing in data, transparency in data can help create the accountability. None of us sitting in the room are going to hold the governments accountable to those reforms. We need people of their countries, people of local governments there. They are the ones who can hold their governments accountable. Neither the scientists, nor the World Bank, nor the UN. And this is where I find this loop of data, transparency, accountability, ensuring that there is better data, there is better analysis to inform the people as to how things are changing. In today's world of technology, it doesn't take a thing for governments to say, from tomorrow, we are going to open the entire data sets with the Central Administration of Statistics and DOS. Because you have government's cloud. You know, my dream would be that you have, if not anything, have a water cloud. Ask all the ministries of water resources in the world to put your data on water cloud. Why not? The world needs to know what's happening. Invite young people, students in primary schools to put water data. What was the quality of water? Give them tools today to bring the water quality testing. I don't need sophisticated science, come on. I need people to be part of this movement, and technology can really fuel this movement big time. I'm a new kid in this business. This is my 4th week, as Mark said. But I really think, like I'm telling you, that it is not about more money. It is about understanding the political economy of water, which perhaps the most complex thing. And I'm glad that you're doing a session on data, because data is needed to enforce accountability, all of us, in how public finances are being used and how do we deliver results on the ground. And since there was a discussion on the March 23 conference in New York, I think the first thing we need to demand from the governments coming to the meeting is transparency in data, including in the water sector.
Okay, thank you. Very clear messages. Make people part of this movement, transparency in data. So moving to you, Kelly, you work with an organization that works extensively with policy advocacy and with communities. So how do these issues around science and data and what you have and what's missing, how does that look from your point of view?
Yeah, thank you. I have the privilege of following and building off of much that everyone here has said, so agree with so much of it. I think first and foremost, we take a hard look and we look for a greater integration to accelerate progress, and that's both integration of the data as well as the policy frameworks that come with it. It requires us to reach out and collaborate across sectors instead of working in silos, because while we work in a WASH silo for WaterAid, we know the challenges we face do not, and the challenges that the communities we're working in face do not correspond to those silos. So let's get that greater integration. An easy example here is biodiversity, climate change, and WASH. 70% of wastewater globally goes back into nature untreated. What a connection between the essential elements of sanitation services to protect both healthy ecosystems and healthy communities and families alike. But there's too much of a false distinction, a false dichotomy between organizations working in these two spaces. So I think that's a call to action to us. Frankly, it's in our control to both link that data as well as begin to integrate programs and policies around the world. An example of this that leads off of my colleague from the World Bank, his statements, WaterAid's Sush Wash program in Uganda looked at the long-term challenges facing wash services at a local level. And the evidence that we gathered there really did provide that local lens on data and actionability so that it could perform, or it could inform both WASH and healthcare facility conversations, but also critical national and state level policy discussions on cross-sectoral WASH integration. So I want to just highlight that as well. Second point we would make is on data, and building off of what everybody said, we know data is vital and our ally. It's really exciting to hear the progress around remote sensing, but I'm a little worried that that data isn't going to answer the so what for policymakers. And so I think it's a wake-up call to the sector to say, what do we need to do a much better job connecting data to actionable insights. That word insight isn't used enough. I'd replace data almost always with the word insight wherever possible, that can then be connected to clear, direct calls to action. So this requires not only more technical and scientific expertise, but also, as Dr. Eckstein and Ambassador Miskova mentioned, new capabilities in infographics, communication, and something we in this sector shy away from, the word marketing and sales of our insights. And finally, finance. We need more finance, and we need different in kind finance. We have the expertise, the energy, and enthusiasm, but if we don't see progress in financing WASH and water solutions globally, the political support will stall out. WaterAid's Mission Critical report highlighted the $230 billion gap needed each year to keep us on track. You mentioned that as well. That's a big, audacious number, but there's three things that make that seem more achievable to me. First, there's $35 trillion around the world held in private pension and investment funds. We need just less than 1% of that to mobilize. Two, the new Boosting Business report from WaterAid, which just came out this week, highlights the achievements that can be, or the gains that can be achieved on the corporate side when they integrate WASH services into their supply chain, as much as 29% increase in productivity. That translates directly to the bottom line of those corporates and ultimately to GDP growth, allowing for greater WASH accountability if we link it. And then C, the potential for blended finance to fund critical solutions. Blended finance can solve two challenges. For private investors, the integration of public funding can de-risk so that they can crowd in. And on the public side, they're looking for leverage and the private sector can find that. So I think those three pieces are really where we at WaterAid look.
Thank you. So you posed the question, what's the so what from science and evidence and data for policymakers? So maybe for the next round of questions, and we'll go to all 6 of you for this, let's get at that so what, okay? So what is it that we have to change? And I think this came up in session 2 as well. What is it that we have to change? Or what are your ideas for how we can do a better job in translating science to policy? I'd like to start with Elena to start talking about that question. Elena.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I was waiting for this question, to be very honest, because in WMO, we're very clear that communicating physical parameters is no longer sufficient. So we need to talk in terms of impacts, risks, and so what's. So one of the things we are calling up our scientific partners, it's to be more tailored, more specific, describe products in the terminology of risk, relevance, also social economic benefits. So it's not just sufficient to communicate physical parameters anymore. So this is a challenging task, and it needs also to work with local communities and with the regional communities, because for every community and sector, so what looks different. So that is kind of tailoring and impact-based information provision. But if since I have a floor, can I mention a few words about the data and information provision? One of the huge ambitions of WMO in water is creation of the proper global water information system, which will underpin hopefully our global water resources report, similar to one WMO produces on climate. However, in order to do that, we really need to roll out the global hydrological status and outlook system. So we need to know what resources we have integrately on the planet, be it hydrology, water, lakes or rivers, be it under groundwater, soil moisture, cryosphere. We are very, very short in really having comprehensive data sets on all these parameters. They're very good in WMO in weather and climate type of parameters, but even there we have gaps which we are trying to address. WMO is a global normative organization, and I think we are only ones who have a universal, open and free and unrestricted exchange data policy for all the countries in the world. But even there, we have gaps in the parameters we need to have for proper early warning systems and proper weather and climate prediction. In the water, the subject of our conversation today, the situation is challenging. So we are spearheading right now the initiatives all across our regions to create proper climate hydrological status and outlook systems. So we would know what the water resources we have now, how they are different from the normal, and where we are going. So we also want to have more downscale scenarios for the regions and even for the basins to understand the dynamics. In this way, there are some ways how we can help. For instance, we could speak not about the raw data, but about universal water hydrology indicators, like we do in climate. In climate, we know exactly how much CO2 is right now in the atmosphere because we have a very rigorous network which measures that. But in hydrology, groundwater, cryosphere, the data is clearly not sufficient. So we are working on the set of indicators which would be universal, understandable, and give all the stakeholders the dynamics. So first message is impact-based forecasting, information, what it means and what effect it would have and what risk. And second, we really need to work together to get information and data into the one system. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Elena. So more information and data is on the way, I think is what you're telling us, so we can get, if we and WMO can get those jobs done. Going to you now, Carolina. You do a lot of communicating, and you're a good communicator. I see you in lots of places this year. So what do you recommend to us that we need to change in terms of better translating science to policy?
Yeah, and thank you. I talk a lot, so that's probably why you see me, maybe hear me too. I think something really basic, and I've talked about it before, is just the general vocabulary that is used, making it really real, tangible, that you don't need a PhD to understand the concepts. Something else that's probably less popular is the length of some of these reports and the density of them. So it's the combination of this sort of far out vocabulary with a 50-page report it's so far away from my life and from reality for a lot of people that are outside of academia. And so trying to tell a story more than just trying to bring the facts. And storytelling was brought up by somebody, I can't quite remember who, and following that. So what story are you telling with the data, and what's the output and the change that's trying to be made through the report or the study? And a good way or example is, have you thought, I don't know who's publishing all of these things, but having volunteers read it that are outside of the water sector, or outside of WASH, and saying, circle anything that doesn't make sense. And then working together to figure out how to make this more readable, quicker to understand. I did it in college for a professor, and I think it was a great way to make this knowledge accessible. I'd also say, you mentioned it, a bit of marketing, a bit of campaigning. Again, we always talk about how siloed and separated we are from everything else. But if I'm honest, I don't see a lot of water stuff going outward. When I got involved in this area, in this field, I had to go find it. I didn't know all of this existed and was so dense, and there's so many passionate people with a lot of good data. Yeah, so vocabulary, trying to do outreach and really ask the question, do you understand this? Not so dense, not so long, and campaigning, marketing.
Fantastic, very clear. That's what we need, clarity. Thank you very much. Let me turn now to Akisa. Maybe I'll pose this question slightly differently to you, Akisa, and make it a little personal, because you used to work for IMI, you used to work for my organization. So if our challenge is to better translate science to policy, then what would be your recommendations to me? What do we need to change at IMI so we're better at that challenge of translating science to policy?
Thank you, Mark. It's not an easy question, but I think you are doing a very great job at IMI. What I have been, when I was at IMI, already pushing maybe to more transdisciplinary kind of research, and where we forging new linkages between disciplines. As I said, we have new challenges we have to push. We have to break all the silos and push the frontiers. For example, on the behavior of people, behavioral change. So the cultural aspects, you have a lot of economies and so on. Now we have seen the health, but I mean, IMI is also working. So in addition to what we have to maybe this focus on social, but also on cultural aspects and so on. And another point is also that, we work, I have been in the government and I have seen how much we are still working in silos. For me, it's really how when we work about water, it is about development. And you see the link between water, agriculture, food, energy, and so on, and how we can territorialize, the approaches and making the different people and institutions working together, because we have a different kind of approach. And this is going to give an overall coherence to land use planning, water, soil, agriculture, and climate policies. Because as I said, we are still water people talking to water people. We need to have the other people. The centrality of water pushes us to really bring together and to have this kind of rethink the complementarity between different regions, between different sectors, and to have something that more appropriate at a different scale, and not only looking at the water, but the other sectors as well. It is a challenge, but this is something that we need to do, because if not, if people don't understand and think about planning at the territory level, and then we upscale it at the national, but we can do it nationally and locally, regionally. I have seen that we are not moving. Each one is thinking its own corner, and it is not moving.
So thank you, Akisa. That is good advice to me and my colleagues at IMI to break the silos and make sure that we're proactive in doing that. Thank you. Let me now just switch the emphasis in our discussion slightly to the more political, and how, building upon all the inputs that we've received so far, what does it take? What can we do more of? How can we help from a scientific, from a data standpoint, from the point of view of indicators? How can we help water break through with political leaders? Maybe I'll start first with you, Sarush, on that.
This is a difficult question because just to give you a sense, I may be wrong by about 100 plus minus, but on an average, the World Bank produces about 5,000 pages of reports, pretty much for every country where we work, every year. These are climate reports, poverty assessments, environment assessments, you name it. And this is very important. We'll continue to do so. We are a very data-driven organization. We are very analytical. Our strength is our knowledge. 30,000 experts around the world from all sectors that you can possibly think of, from some of the best universities in developing and developed countries. We have one of the largest open data initiative. Our board decided to disclose all the World Bank data. It's been 7 years now. You can go and search anything that you want to see. That's not where the problem I have found in my work on the ground and working with the presidents, prime ministers, very senior leaders in parliament. Our work is not empowering people in the countries where we work. And this is why I emphasized what I said in the beginning, because often the research we do is based on a very small sample survey. Somebody has done a focus group discussion somewhere. We call 30 people, we write a report. This is not going to help create accountability in the systems. So we need to make sure that our engagement with the governments is essentially calling for empowering people through data, through better analysis, better science, in a way that people understand the point you were making before. There is progress in this direction because of our call for it. All of you, civil society, young people are demanding better accountability. And the only way governments can prove their accountability is by delivering services and showing this by way of open systems on how things are getting better. The second is, the science is also becoming far more complex. When you really bring water, climate, environment, landscape, biodiversity, not many countries are able to understand what all this means for their development plans. What needs to change? As I was coming into this meeting, I know I cannot disclose the name of the country because it's a sensitive issue because of the risk involved. The country, their analysis shows possibly they will be running out of water in not very far in the future. They are debating desalination as an option. Desalination is a very expensive proposition. It will have an implication on the water tariff. Water tariff may result in popular, how have other countries dealt with it, because many countries are going for desal. And this is a country not very far from here, by the way. The question essentially being, they want to know what are the experiences globally. And as you kind of get into this discussion, you'll realize it is an intersection of science, macro, fiscal, market, social dimensions. And sometimes I find governments are struggling on many of these components, but including in science. But how do you bring science, which is particularly the climate science, which has an implication on water? The level of uncertainty is very high. No one today is able to say with a level of great deal of higher levels of probability as to what's going to happen where and by when. You can still be making assumptions based on the probabilistic analysis, but the chances are that you could also be wrong are very high. But the point I wanted to make is that, and this is something which we need to think how the technological revolution is taking place in the world. You know, the governments are increasingly embracing the idea of a chief technology officer in a way who tries to bring the whole of the government focus on technology, making sure that every part of the government is essentially embracing new technological breakthrough in everything you are doing. OECD countries have already tried. US has a very well functioning chief technological officer option. Many developing countries are taking this idea on board. I think it is time also for us to look at possibly chief science officer who brings in basically the new areas of research into the whole space of development planning and thinking. They could be sitting in Ministry of Planning, could be Ministry of Finance, could be somewhere, but something I think is going to come because the way the science is evolving globally. And my last point, and I'll keep quiet then, is link budgeting with science. When a ministry submits a proposal to Ministry of Finance by investing in a project, the ministry needs to say, what is the level of is back. Yes, thank you. What is the level of science that is supporting the proposal of the Ministry of Water asking for more resources or whatever resources they're asking? It cannot be scientifically blind when you're asking for funding. And we've also learned it hard way as World Bank. Any World Bank project, when it goes to our board of directors, we have to write in the document, which is in public domain, what lessons have you learned by doing similar investments around the world, and how those have been incorporated into this project. So I think there's so much, we are also learning. This is a very complex process. These are some of the ideas, but I think unless you link, this theme of this World Water Week, that's what's so exciting to me. Unless we value something, we never look after it. So please encourage your governments, your organizations to value what we are doing. And I think if we start valuing the power of science and how it should inform the budget in a country in the water sector, I think we will see the change. Mere advocacy not linked to financing is not going to result in action.
Super, thank you. Let me turn to Kelly. How do we break through at the political level?
I agree once again with everything said. I think WaterAid India has had some direct conclusions on this from some of the work that they've done and found three quick things. One, relevance. Evidence must speak directly to the policy issues at hand and be directed to it. Two, timeliness. To make an impact, that evidence has to be collected, analyzed, assessed, messaged, and socialized quickly. So how do we go from years to months to weeks in our cycles? And three, inclusive. How do we involve stakeholders from the start? And I think as we look towards March, this is a critical question we need to be asking ourselves. Can we have them help identify the hypotheses that need to be proven or disproven? And in doing so, we can actually move from being relevant to being targeted in how we communicate that back to them.
Super, thank you. We're running short on time, so probably the final word then before I wrap up, I'll give to Ambassador Hikmat, but with the same question, but perhaps now in the context more specifically of the 2023 conference. From where you sit and the job you're doing, what do you see as key to breaking through at the political level?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's very important and very timely question. So as I said, I mean, it comes, the answer comes from our work that we have been doing, or our great partnership that we have with the Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, as a co-host, but also as UNDESA, as a secretariat of the conference with the support of the UN Water. We strive to make the conference a success, a significant for the world, because the vision of the conference is to be inclusive, both in the conference itself, as well as in the results, action-oriented with concrete plans and actions, and cross-sectorial with all sectors being mobilized to improve the management and utilization of water resources. This conference, we believe, should be historical for the world community. And it's not because it would be the first UN water conference after 50 years, but because of needs for urgent action. And many of our distinguished speakers spoke about actions. Actions indeed are needed because today water resources are under high pressure of impacts of climate change, population growth, economic development, and other challenges. And without urgent actions, it will be very complicated to achieve SDG 6 and other water-related goals and targets. We need to make our actions more visible, to catalyze, accelerate, and scale them. We need clear commitments across all our sectors, silos, and interests, United Nations, stakeholders, professionals on actions that help deliver on water actions in the 2030 agenda. Actions that can be scaled and replicated in the years to come. The emphasis should be on accelerated implementation and improved impact towards achieving SDGs. That is the reason why the co-hosts Tajikistan and Netherlands proposed a water action agenda in which stakeholders can voluntarily indicate commitments for actions to further strengthen the global water agenda and to make the UN 2023 Water Conference success impactful. The Water Action Agenda, in our view, is a way to gather the commitments of all stakeholders on Agenda 2030 and SDG 6 in particular, in which stakeholders can voluntarily indicate commitment for action to further strengthen the global water agenda. This is also mentioned in the modalities resolution, in which member states are invited to come up with voluntary commitments. To conclude, the Water Action Agenda could be a useful platform to make the UN Water Conference a watershed moment and more impactful in the implementation of goals and objectives of the Water Action Decade resolution and to achieve SDG 6 and other water-related goals and targets. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. So just before we thank our panelists, I'll just give a few wrap-up remarks of my own. I think our focus is action and acceleration. We've heard calls that to do that, we need to strengthen the loop between data, transparency, and accountability. We need to look at how we use data and evidence to transform narratives and do that in creative ways and storytelling and so on. We need to take on the struggle, if you like, of systems change. So how do we help governments? How do we help governments to understand how to manage the multiple guidance and recommendations and analysis that's coming at them in 5,000 pages of reports every year from the World Bank alone, to take that on and really do something with it, but recognizing that system's complexity and helping them to do that. We know that there's new data technologies just over the horizon, but those will need to, those may be at global level, but they will need to reach the ground and enable the kind of granularity that's needed for to make that translation into action. We need to break silos. We need to build messaging around our evidence and socialize that evidence. We need to build science into budgeting so that we can reflect the values that we've been talking about around water this week in budgeting. And as I said at the outset, this is a complicated space. Science to policy for water is complicated and complex. But I do believe that gradually we're all getting better at it. Having come here for enough years, we are gradually getting better at it. But we do need to go faster. So it's very good to have the reflections and inputs from our panelists today. So I would like to thank them all for their very thoughtful contributions. And for taking the time with us. And I'll hand back to Catherine.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, panelists. That was really fantastic. I'd like now to welcome Durisa Durtra, the founder and director of the Center for Studies in Regulation and Infrastructure, and she will be closing our session.
Thank you, Catherine. So, and to all the speakers in this amazing moderated panel. Thank you, Mark. So this was the last session from a seminar that was conceived to emphasize the importance of science and evidence to inspire policy design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. We have designed it as a 4-session event with discussions around 3 themes: WASH, integrated resource management and governance, and advanced services and observations. In the final session, we heard from speakers, policymakers who will participate in the UN water high-level events in 2023 and beyond. We wanted to give them the opportunity to voice what they expect from scientists to implement an actionable plan to accelerate SDG goals in a timely manner. Aaron and I, Aaron Salzberg, have worked in and with governments and regulators. In the last decade, we have created 2 centers: the Water Institute of North Carolina, of University of North Carolina, and the Center for Studies on Regulation and Infrastructure, hoping we could be catalyzers translating scientific facts to inform policymakers and policymaking. We know how vital these 2 communities, scientists and policymakers, are to advance SDG 6 in a timely manner, meaning urgently. But we must improve their ability to communicate not only with each other, but also in dialogues that include communities. In the 1970s, Peltzman, Stigler, and Becker profoundly influenced our thinking of regulation. Peltzman's main contribution is to tell us that politicians and governments are suppliers of regulation, of legislation. They produce rules in response to people's, communities, and interest groups' demands. So, if the science community wishes to influence policy, it must engage communities, translating its results and communicating how they can benefit from the policies oriented by science and evidence. This message was a call for action we heard from a participant in our previous session, from an Australian politician. On the same lines, Kelly emphasized the importance of including stakeholders from the start. In the world we live, it is no longer enough to think development from the perspective of economic growth and jobs. Social networks connect and empower people and communities that are able to voice their concerns to policymakers. But at the same time, quite often, they are faced with populist proposals. Saroj acknowledged the gap. He claims that the work the World Bank is doing is not empowering the people in the countries they work with through data, better science, and better analysis. But it must do that. So by linking budgeting with science, we can support maybe ministers, the government, who asks for money, valuing the power of science and how it can inform budget allocation. He presented us with a call for action. Let us launch a water cloud. We heard a lot about open data, but one last comment. So I'm an economist, so I'm on network industries. we followed, water is the one in which public funds represent a larger share of investments. But the reality of the crisis that we have experienced in the last years leaves a reduced fiscal space for public investments. And this fact makes it even more relevant to allocate funds and political capital wisely, channeling them to the most compelling opportunities. Science can help us focus, accelerate. It's about making actionable plans. This is what we heard. Lastly, so I was asking Alice, are you all familiar with the say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating? So I propose to go out a bit from the script and to tell and to hear from young rapporteurs. For those who are not familiar with the organization of World Water Week, SIWI benefits from the help of young rapporteurs who attend the sessions, producing reports. They gather information, transform this in takeaways, in missions, and calls for action. I have two here. So I wonder if one of them would be willing to tell us what they heard.
Hello, my name is Ethan. I've been a junior rapporteur here this week, and it's been really great hearing all these great stories in this session and outside of it. And it all, to me, sounds really, really great. And in my humble opinion, I think it only works if we hold ourselves and each other accountable. I think we need to make sure that we can have the courage to criticize. We can't be afraid to point out what companies, countries, and policymakers aren't on board. And this really sounds like it's our first opportunity since 1977. So I hope we don't waste it.
I cannot think of a better way to wrap it up, our last session. But firstly, I would like to thank you, our co-conveners, so Alice and UNESCO, WaterAid we have here. So thank you, Catherine. So also IWRM. So we had help also from WMO, from WHO, and I'd like to thank John for all the support. We, together with Aaron, we are members of the Scientific Program Committee, but of course, this work would not have been possible without the support of our young SPC member, Penny. Penny, please stand up. A round of applause. Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed, and thank you, Aaron. I'm pretty sure you are listening to us. Thank you. Thank you, Rami, as well, Kelly, all the participants.
We also need to give Joisa a very big round of applause. She did not thank herself. She has been so instrumental in this session. Thank you all for coming.